Across the United States, empty recruiting offices are becoming a common sight, replacing the long lines of people eager to enlist. Recruiters often sit and wait for applicants who, according to the latest numbers, are unlikely to show up at all. Out of the 6 branches of the armed forces, 3, namely the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force, fell well short of their recruiting targets for the year 2022, with the Army missing by the widest margin. It failed to enlist 15,000 people, falling short of its goal of 60,000 new recruits. This has raised serious concerns about the future of the United States military as a whole, and for good reason. It was the worst recruiting year in more than 50 years, and leaders are now scrambling to find the weak points and patch them up. The fight for military talent is in full swing, but it is nothing new. In the past, when troop numbers dropped, the country turned to conscription, but that has always been easier said than done. From the very beginning, presidents and Congress tried to establish a full draft system, yet it was not truly enforced until the year 1940, when the world was sliding into the Second World War. The Selective Training and Service Act was passed, and all men between 21 and 35 were required to register, with those called to serve chosen by lottery. On the 7th of December in the year 1941, Japan launched its attack and declared war. After Pearl Harbor, President Truman and Congress lowered the minimum age for service from 21 to 18 and replaced the lottery with an age-based system, where the oldest were called up first. Conscription returned during the early Cold War in the year 1948 and again during the Korean War. It was followed by the highly controversial drafts of the Vietnam War in the 1960s, and toward the end of that decade, President Nixon reinstated the lottery. The backlash was intense. Draft avoidance became widespread, and by the year 1973, at a time when the United States government faced deep public distrust, the country ended the Vietnam War and shifted to a fully volunteer force, a system that remains in place today. Yet the volunteer model itself is not the main reason for the current recruiting collapse. In fact, the United States saw record enlistment in the year 2009, when the Army exceeded its target of 65,000 new soldiers by another 5,000. At the same time, the military is no stranger to downturns. There was the slump in the late 1990s when booming technology companies offered attractive alternatives, and again in the year 2005, when frustration with the war in Iraq and a strong economy reduced interest in military service. So what is driving the current crisis? According to the Department of Defense, most young people simply do not meet the basic standards. Only 23% of Americans in the prime recruiting age between 17 and 24 are eligible to serve. That means an astonishing 77% of those the military would ideally want are disqualified unless they receive special waivers. The department points first to obesity, a problem affecting recruitment since the year 2014. Added to this are more applicants with criminal records, poor academic performance, and serious mental health issues, leaving the military with a very limited pool. And this is only part of the problem. Even among those who are eligible, only about 9% would seriously consider joining. This brings us to the second major factor: fear. War is terrifying, and in the age of instant information, people have a far more direct view of how brutal it can be. 57% of those surveyed by the Department of Defense said they worry about developing psychological and emotional problems during service and afterward. The numbers reveal a deep reluctance to risk one's life and then return home to face long-lasting consequences. It is no secret that the history of the United States in caring for its veterans is complicated and often disappointing. More than 10% of the homeless population consists of veterans, and although that share is slowly declining, it remains a stark warning of how difficult the transition to civilian life can be. In the year 2022, more than 900,000 veterans were estimated to be living in poverty. The National Institute on Drug Abuse reported that the share of veterans receiving health care who were diagnosed with mental illness or substance use disorders rose from 28% in the year 2001 to 42% in the year 2020. And the situation is even more alarming when considering that, as of the year 2020, an average of 17 veterans a day were taking their own lives. These shocking figures paint life after service as a constant struggle. And who would willingly choose that future? Even though some military benefits and programs are meant to address these issues, gaining access to them often feels like a frustrating game of bureaucracy. As recently as the year 2021, lawmakers debated a proposal to end the annual requirement for veterans to repeatedly prove service-related injuries just to receive a clothing allowance. It is also reported that the Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims can take more than a year to recognize a case, followed by further delays before benefits are actually paid. A third reason may sound less obvious: but it echoes obstacles from the past. Unemployment is low, around 3.7%, almost back to pre-pandemic levels. Economic uncertainty has always been a key driver of military recruitment, and with the rise of online business and remote work, a military career is no longer seen as a necessity. And then there is the huge elephant in the room that the Department of Defense steps around very carefully, and that is military culture itself. Today, anyone can easily look up online what the United States military has done over the years, and much of it is not pleasant reading. The massacre near the village of No-Gun-Ri during the Korean War, the shocking photographs from the year 2004 showing American soldiers abusing prisoners at the Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq, or the conflicting reports of war crimes during the war in Afghanistan are just a few examples among many. Then, there are the problems inside the forces themselves. The headlines that appear when you search for misconduct in the United States military are disturbing. Service members now speak out far more openly about what happens within the ranks. And in the year 2021, the number of reported assaults rose by 13%. To understand how serious this is, nearly 36,000 active duty troops said they had experienced unwanted physical contact. The largest share of these reports came from the Army. And the crucial point is that Generation Z knows about all of this. With information freely available online, these are things the military can no longer hide. That makes it far harder to convince young people to enlist. Recent data for the year 2025 also show that the number of new recruits is falling again, and fewer applicants meet the physical and psychological standards, which are stricter than ever. At the same time, rising numbers of soldiers are leaving the service, either for civilian jobs or because of long-term stress and burnout. More and more young people are asking themselves whether a military career is really for them, aware that it is not just about adventure, but also about the real risk of trauma, injury, and lasting health consequences. Fixing these issues cannot wait, because soldiers are central to much of the success of the United States. Alongside its geography, its expansionist history, and its economic ambitions, the military has been a main pillar of its status as a global power. The United States has the largest military presence in the world, with more than 750 active bases spread across 80 countries. For better or worse, these bases and the troops who serve there are essential to protecting the nation's economic and geopolitical interests. And its leaders fully understand the power that comes with that. This is not something the country can afford to let decline. So what can be done? Will the draft return? Or mandatory military service like in South Korea, Israel, or Norway? Probably not. And it is unlikely unless the United States were directly attacked. Even then, a temporary wave of patriotism, like the one after the attacks of September 11th, would likely bring in enough volunteers to make conscription unnecessary. Instead, the Department of Defense has stepped up incentives, including higher benefits and financial bonuses, such as enlistment payments of up to $50,000. Those willing to ship out to basic training within 30 days could receive as much as $35,000. Whether this will be enough is uncertain. Media has also become a powerful tool, and some branches make no secret of using it. If you saw a military advertisement before a screening of the film Top Gun: Maverick, you witnessed this strategy firsthand. It worked with the original Top Gun in the year 1986, when Navy recruitment temporarily rose by 8% after its release. Video games play a role as well, often portraying war as exciting and heroic, rather than as exhausting, traumatic, and deadly, depending on where a person is deployed. But media cuts both ways. A clear example is the controversy around the streaming platform Twitch. The Army and the Navy both operated official channels there, where active duty soldiers streamed games like Call of Duty or flight simulators while promoting their units. The situation changed when viewers began asking in chat about alleged war crimes. Negative comments were deleted, and some users were banned. That might be normal for private streamers, but when government institutions do it, it looks very different. The streams were eventually suspended, and instead of helping recruitment, the episode likely did the opposite. Some recruiting offices have also started removing old barriers, such as bans on neck tattoos. The Army even considered dropping the requirement for a high school diploma, but quickly backed down after public criticism. The Navy, on the other hand, raised the maximum enlistment age to 41 and lowered the threshold for the Armed Services Qualification Test, so that applicants with below-average scores could still qualify. Similar steps were taken in the year 2008 and led to a short-term rise the following year. The key word is short-term. It shows that while lowering standards can help briefly, lasting change requires much more. Some recent modernization efforts, such as expanded mental health programs or updated training for new technologies, have shown promise, but they struggle with limited funding and staffing, which so far keeps their impact small. Part of the problem may also reflect the times we live in. Compare active duty numbers in the year 1985 with those in the year 2019. They fell by nearly half, from about 2,100,000 to roughly 1,300,000. And this is not just an American issue. Most advanced countries face similar shortages. With modern technology, automation, and drones taking over the most dangerous tasks, fewer soldiers are needed than in the past, but they are still needed. The reality, as with most things, is layered. The Department of Defense cannot by itself solve obesity, weak education, or criminal records, all of which point to broader social problems. What it can influence is the quality of life for soldiers and veterans. A cultural shift from within is long overdue. That means strict adherence to international standards, real accountability for misconduct, and cutting through the bureaucracy that delays benefits, especially healthcare, that veterans have earned. Changing how life after service is perceived could make a real difference and attract more recruits. If the Department of Defense wants to adapt to a changing world, it must change how it operates. Otherwise, the future of the United States military risks becoming weaker, with underperforming bases and dissatisfied, poorly supported troops, a trend that would ultimately reduce the country's global influence and standing.